Hi there, I'm James Dapperchi, and this is Coffee and a Case Note. Team, today we are talking about an application for a couple of interlocutory injunctions. We have a plaintiff, we have a defendant, and we have a couple of other relevant parties. Now, the position here is that the plaintiff is a shareholder in the defendant, and the defendant's whole role is it owns a few shares in a tech company. It doesn't really do anything other than hold these shares. And the tech company is itself reasonably interesting. The shares, those tech shares as we might call them, are illiquid, so they're not listed on any exchanges or any indexes anywhere. It's tough to find a market for them to change hands. There's no sort of obvious sellers or purchasers that are kind of jumping up and down about it. And it's in a fairly specific niche technological corner of the market. It's also a company, this tech company, that is yet to generate any revenue or any profit. So let's work through it again. Our plaintiff today, who's coming to court, is suing a number of people, including our defendant, and the defendant's whole thing is owning shares in that tech company I referred to before. Now, what is going on? What does the plaintiff want to happen? Now, as things are progressing with the management of the defendant, there is a meeting called. And at that meeting, there are two resolutions proposed, or resolutions with an effect broadly to what I'm about to explain. Those resolutions are, one, can we, as a bunch of members, as a bunch of shareholders of the defendant, agree to accept a certain offer for the purchase of our shares in TechCo? So that's question one. And two, if we don't go ahead and accept that offer, should we go ahead and place the defendant into MVL, Members Voluntary Liquidation? And what the plaintiff is saying today is, hey, I want an injunction. I want to urgently come to the court and say, I want to stop that meeting going ahead. I want to stop there being a discussion about the potential acceptance of this purchase offer, and I want to stop there being a discussion about a potential winding up in relation to what is going on. And so we're going to need to understand some of the background. Let's get into it. The directors of the defendant, that's the people sort of in charge of the defendant, in charge of the entity that owns shares in the tech company, are engaged in the management of that company, as you might imagine. And for some time, they're looking out for a purchaser for the shares in TechCo. Now, one of the relevant bits of information is that in this same piece of litigation, and about a year before this particular phase of the litigation, there's a separate injunction granted where the court says in the plaintiff's favour, yes, the defendant is stopped from issuing further shares that might dilute the plaintiff's interest in the company. So we've got this existing injunction to stop the dilution of the plaintiff's shares. And what the directors of the defendant say is that engaging in that litigation was quite a costly thing to engage in. There were costs that attached to it. And so there's now a bit of a solvency question about the defendant company itself, because all it does is own these shares. It doesn't trade, doesn't make any money, it just holds some shares. There are these fees that have arisen from the litigation. And there's sort of a limited accessibility to finance in respect of that. So the directors of the defendant are concerned about solvency. The view they have is that the only path back to solvency would be to sell the TechCo shares and realise them, or failing that, place the defendant into voluntary administration or members voluntary liquidation. So that's sort of the background here. Now, there's an interesting story with some of the purchase offers being issued in relation to the shares in TechCo. Firstly, there are some strange bylaws that sort of govern the way that TechCo thinks that it operates as affairs, and sort of the parties seem to accept that it's governed by these bylaws. One of them is that TechCo has to approve the changing of hands, the sale of any shares or any potential transfers of those shares. And so the directors of the defendant approach TechCo and say, hey, can I get a list of your shareholders, please, in order for us to canvass those shareholders and say, g'day shareholder 1, we're trying to sell these shares, what do you reckon? Shareholder 2, what do you think? Shareholder 3, what do you think? And try to work through them to try to find a buyer for the defendant's shares in TechCo. And what TechCo says is, no, no thanks. What we will do, though, is we will introduce you to an offeror, a specific person who's going to buy those shares from you. And TechCo makes good on that introduction, and indeed that person makes good on their status as the offeror and offers to buy the TechCo shares from the defendant. Now, at around this time, and sort of in parallel, but maybe slightly later than this offeror making its offer, the plaintiff causes a number of other offers to be made. It makes an offer on its own behalf. It makes an offer on behalf of one entity that it used to be called, that it sort of changed its name to. It agrees to stand behind an offer made by another party, and it's sort of confusing, but in essence, the plaintiff is agitating in parallel to the offeror with an offer or an offers of its own, or offers made by entities related to it. And so there's this sort of parallel series of offers from the plaintiff, or people in the plaintiff's universe, and the offeror itself who's made this offer. And so you'll recall that the question we've got at this general meeting, the whole heart of today's litigation, is there's a general meeting proposed to consider whether this offer ought to be accepted, and it's the offeror's offer, or two, if the offer is not to be accepted, should the company be placed into members' voluntary liquidation. So what the plaintiff says is there's a serious question to be tried here in relation to whether members were given enough notice of what the offeror's offer was in order for us to go and consider it. And what the plaintiff says is all we got was a summary of the offer. We didn't get the full formal notice. We didn't get the full formal offer itself. There was not enough detail there for us to get into. And so there's a serious question to be tried there. There should be an injunction granted. What the court says is no, that's not right. The court says that because the plaintiff can't point to any actual missing information in the offer. The court says even though it's only a summary of offer that was put forward, the summary ticks all the boxes, and you haven't pointed to any unticked boxes that might lead the court to conclude, potentially the other side to concede that there was anything missing. And so the plaintiff fails to seek the first injunction, which is the injunction to stop the consideration of the purchase offer. The other injunction related to the potential placement of the company into members' voluntary liquidation. And on this point, the initial question is whether there is a serious question to be tried. And what's interesting is the court accepts, indeed, there is a serious question to be tried as to whether that vote ought to be stopped. And so the court turns its mind to the balance of convenience question. And it is here that the court notes that what the plaintiff is after is a very short period in which the plaintiff ought to be prevented from its members placing itself into voluntary liquidation. And because there is a mediation set for days within this sort of period the plaintiff's seeking, the court actually agrees that the balance of convenience does favour the plaintiff being prevented, the defendant being prevented from considering the second part of the set of resolutions proposed for the general meeting. And so what do we have? We have the plaintiff trying to stop two limbs of this general meeting. Limb one, can we stop this purchaser's offer from being considered? No, there's no serious question there. Limb two, can we stop people talking about placing the company into liquidation? Yes, the plaintiff succeeds on that point, but only for a short period of time with a mediation and some further negotiations in the offing. I hope that discussion assisted you, and I'll look forward to chatting again soon over another coffee and in respect of another case note. Cheers.